Welcome to the module on Azure Monitor. Get ready to explore Azure Monitor's powerful capabilities and learn how to transform your monitoring approach. We'll cover the essentials of Azure Monitor, enhance incident response with alerting, and dive into analyzing your infrastructure using Azure Monitor logs. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and skills to effectively monitor and maintain Azure resources, making you proficient in Azure Monitor. So let's begin. Before we start going into the portal and having a look at Azure Monitor, let's have a look at some more details into the different components that help us in monitoring our resources. And when you're looking at data in your Azure environment, there's a lot of data that Azure automatically captures for you. However, there are requirements for other resources to be enabled for them to be captured. For example, if you're looking at data coming in from your application, then in that case, there's a lot of information that Azure captures in terms of what applications are running, how many access plans you have, and some of the details. However, if you're looking at some more detailed information inside to find out how well an application is performing and go into details on that, you might need to enable certain features like application insights to capture that data. Similarly, if you're looking at capturing data from your virtual machines, again, by default, Azure will capture the instance that is running as a virtual machine, how well that resource is performing. But if you're looking to capture further additional data into how the operating system that's running over that virtual machine and any other issues into it, you might need to start capturing additional data to look at your guest operating system on that virtual machine. Similarly, many of the resources that are running within your Azure environment, Azure can capture the data for it and help you monitor some of those resources. That includes anything to do with your subscriptions that you have in your environment or within your tenant, any changes that are configured as part of it. Now, typically this data is captured in a few different ways and is fed into Azure Monitor. Typically, you can have a look at details like changes. So any change flows that are within your environment, things that are being changed or manipulated are captured to display the change. You can look at traces. Now, the traces help you understand the performance and behavior of your application by tracking the requests as they flow through various services and components. Typically, you'll see these in applications like your microservices. You can then also look at information, things like logs and metrics that your system can capture. I'll explain these two just in a bit more detail just in a few moments. Now, it can help you in looking at some of this data to draw out further insights. So we can go into, like I mentioned, in applications and request for application insights to gain more information around it. Similarly, we can do the same for other resources. We can also take some of this data to ask Azure Monitor to help us visualize this and create something called workbooks, which is nice, pretty tables or reports with tables and graphics in there to represent the data that is capturing in the backend. Now we can create dashboards from it or feed this data into other tools that can help us look at visualization or visual reports in our environment. We can also further analyze this data by looking into Metrics Explorer. You can go into Log Analytics to explore this data. For example, running further queries to it to analyze this in a bit more detail or look at your change analysis. You can also build responses to some of this data that the Azure Monitor is capturing for you. So you can define what should happen if there was a matching in response. So you can generate alerts from this. You can also request to have a response to that as an action of an alert generating. Now, this could also mean that we can request autoscale to add a resource or remove a resource as a data that is capturing. And we can also feed this data into other resources. You can look at event hubs to feed this data into. You can look at logic apps to automate some of these processes and create a workflow for us, or simply export this out to another solution or other sources to digest this data further and analyze this further into dig deeper into some more details. Now, just before we go into some of these details on the portal, we can talk about very briefly onto what's the difference between metrics and logs that Azure Monitor can help us also look at. Typically, when we refer to the term metric, this is a numerical value, which is very, very brief to look at, typically lightweight data, to understand in a particular time that we're looking at. And this is ideally a typical real-time scenario that we're picking on. So I'll give you a very quick example. I might want to check what is the current network bandwidth, or how the current network data looks like for my virtual machine or another service that I'm running. Again, in this case, I'm checking out a real life scenario or real-time scenario to see currently how my resource is performing. However, the data that I'm looking to find over here is a specific metric looking at network bandwidth. Maybe it's inbound, maybe it's outbound, maybe I'm looking at the total bandwidth on my network on that resource. However, this is going to be specific numerical value in a particular point in time. So I'm picking maybe every second, every minute on how that data is flowing through my setup and how or what that value looks like. Now, I can add multiple metrics to monitor comparison between them, but typically this is only going to give me a particular resource, one resource at a time, to understand how things are going. As a comparison to this, if I look at my logs are typically a lot more in-depth information around a particular solution that I'm working with. Logs capture all different types of information for me to understand exactly what's going on with that resource and all different aspects of that. For instance, if I have a resource type like an app that's now not functioning and I want to analyze what went wrong, why is it not working, I could go into my logs and find out exactly what went wrong, analyzing different aspects of that resource, trying to find out, did the network traffic stop, did the application code had an error, or looking at analyzing all different aspects of that resource. So it's not picking up one particular metric, but showing me everything around that resource that I'm looking at. So it has a lot more in detail information for me to analyze to find out what went wrong. Now, if I am looking at a quick example of adding that to the metric, in that case, the metric will only show me, is this resource working or not working? What was the error? And if I can see if the error is a particular numerical value and something similar. But to dig deeper into the detail around what went wrong, I will need to go back and analyze my logs to understand what else was going on around at that time and what caused that issue to happen. Now let's jump into the Azure portal and have a look at my Azure Monitor. Right, I'm back onto my Azure portal. Let's jump into Azure Monitor to have a look at what we can find in here. Now, as a quick glance, if I look at my overview tab, it's showing me all sorts of different features that it has available for me to explore. And we can go into some of these to understand exactly what's going on currently in my environment. Before we dig deeper into all these options, let's start doing one thing at a time. So let's start looking at some of the options that we have over here. Now, one of the first things that I want to start with is looking at metrics. Now, as we go into metrics, this is where we can decide and choose a particular resource that we might want to monitor. And let's start picking up a particular type of resource so we can start getting some data out of that. In this case, let's go into the resource group that we've been working on in this week. Let's go pick up that virtual machine that we have, and let's apply that particular data to be picked, or this metric to be picked up from this machine. Now, currently I have quite a few different metrics available for me to pick from. Let's try and see if I can pick one that can show me some data. Let's try disk read bytes. Now, currently this is showing me some activity on the disk, and you can see I can monitor this in real time, and it shows me data again in a particular point in time, and I can monitor that in real time scenario as it moves across the time frame on the screen. Now, if I want to analyze this with other resources, I can always go back into adding another metric to this and simply go and say, let's compare this to data write bytes. Now, I can see both of these options next to each other. And again, like I said, this is a particular numerical value in a point of time. So I can see at any time interval what that value was, when that changed, and how did that change look like. And again, if I wanted to add multiple metrics in here, I can. However, this doesn't give me an overview of everything that was happening with this virtual machine if something went wrong. So at a certain point, if this did stop working and didn't respond, in here I can't see that. However, I can go back into adding another metric that could show, is it working, is it not working, did it stop working, when did it stop working? I can just see that. To analyze this further, the metrics don't show me that detail as an overall report in here. Now, apart from picking metrics from a virtual machine, we can decide to pick metrics from many of the resources in Azure environments, and we can go into picking data that is important to us. However, for now, let's stop using metrics for this part of the demo. Let's start looking at some other options we can explore. Now, for the next part of the demo, apart from looking at the metrics, let's jump into looking at activity logs that I have available in my environments. Now, activity logs are typically tracking all my activities within my environment that I have in Azure at the moment. I can filter this through with many different things. I can choose to filter through different management groups that I might be working in. Remember, a management group can have multiple subscriptions within it, so I can filter that through different management groups that I have. I can also filter down subscriptions, adding multiple subscriptions if I had them, to monitor all of them at the same time or any one particular one. I can choose different severity level from critical, error, warning, or informational data coming through. Again, I can decide to pick a time frame on what I want to pick this data from. So I can make changes to some of these details to filter through the information from the activity log. Now, this is my activities that I've been performing on this portal over the last 6 hours as it shows. Now, we can see that if we go down looking at some of the details over here, these are some of the actions that I was performing in previous sessions, working with different types of resources. For example, creating or updating a disk. Or if I scroll further down, I see there were some issues that were happening in here. Again, it shows me what that was. I can simply filter that down and click on that to find out more information on what exactly was that, where did that issue happen, when did it happen, and again, find out some information around that. Now, apart from going through some of the resources that we've created or deleted or had issues or errors with, we can also filter down things from in here. Things like, let's try typing in errors. All right, let's try changing that to error. And okay, that works a bit better. So now I can see different errors that are listed on the screen. So obviously you can go back into any one of those to find out exactly what the issue was and understand where you can go and resolve some of them. Now, again, as a quick overview to understand exactly what happened, from here we can create a new rule. We'll talk about alert rules in a few moments to understand what we can do with this. Or do we need a new support request created for this particular issue to be resolved? So for now, let's come back out of it. Now, apart from typing in errors, we can look at many other things. We can find out a resource. For example, if we type in a resource like virtual machines, let's see what it brings up. Now, if you see it's coming back up with any issues related to virtual machines, we can go back into this and find any issues that are related around this and see different types of issues related to the virtual machines. Now, we can always find other issues like warnings, we can find errors, we can find informational data from here, we can look into filtering this through a particular resource type like I just did for virtual machines, and see different activities that were carried out within my environment to backtrack my way to see if there was something that was going on. Was that because of an action that was carried out? Now, typically, if you see in this particular environment, you can see the event initiated by, and you can see loads of different resources that were initiating this event or these events. However, there are sometimes users that are triggering these as well. Now, in my particular environment, I am the user working on this demo environment, so there aren't many users that log into it unless I particularly go into a user account to make some changes. So you'll see either me as a user working on this subscription, or as a result of my actions, if there was a service that needed to carry out certain actions, you can see some of the data coming across that as well. Now, if there are multiple users on a subscription, by all means, you'll see which user performed what tasks, and you can carry out to analyze this a bit further to see if a certain issue was to happen, who went and carried out that process or who carried out that change, and you can go back and analyze that a bit more. Now, once you're happy with the type of results that you're looking at, you can look into exporting some of this data out, or you can download this as a CSV document. Now, if I need to export this data out, I have a few options to do that. Let's click on this to find out some more options. Now, as I'm exporting this data out, I have some options over here to export my logs from different sources. Currently, I've already got a couple of reports exporting out, or these diagnostic settings exporting out to multiple logs I already have. Let's create another one for just now to look at. For instance, if I want to add diagnostic settings to export this data out, I can go and give it a name. We can call it AZ104 demo, and we'll call this as that particular setting. Now, what am I going to capture within this? These are different categories that I can pick from. Going to administrator, security, maybe some alerts I want to pick up from. And if you want to pick up some resource health, again, you can pick up all the data if you want. But bear in mind that if you are pushing this data out to other Azure resources, they might need to consume some space or storage into your environment, which typically comes at a cost. For instance, if I look at sending this data to a log analytics workspace. Now, log analytics workspace, again, is a solution that we can choose in Azure environment that hosts data for you or logs for you. And then you can run different queries onto it using KQL or custom query language. In this case, it will occupy some space, and that would mean that comes at an additional cost. I could, however, decide to archive this data for later review, and I can send this to my storage account. And again, if I'm doing that, I'm occupying space in my storage. That also comes at a cost. Now, I could also think of moving this using or stream this using Event Hub, or send this to another solution that I might be working on in terms of prepping this data or analyzing this further by digging deeper into the details and running all sorts of different solutions to this. So I have multiple solutions that I can use to stream this data out or send this data out if I needed to export this information from here. Now let's get back to the main menu one more time. Right, for the next part, let's have a look at the service health. Now, service health is a very nice option to explore in Azure Monitor. If you're ever looking to find out if there were any outages or any issues with any of the Azure regions or any of the services running in any of these regions, you can always find this information in the service health area. You can see if there are any reported issues. Currently, my system shows there are no reported issues at this point in time. If you want to see if there are any planned maintenance that's coming around, and if any of those issues impact you, it should typically show you a report over here that suggests there's a planned maintenance coming up ahead, you have these resources running, and what kind of impact that should show you on your environment. Now let's have a quick look at the history to see if there are any previous issues that we can look at. More data. Okay, let's change that to last 3 months. Okay. Now, if I go into my health history, I can see there were some issues in the past that are reported. Again, some of these are based on resources that I might have configured in my environment. As a quick overview to see what these are, I can always click back onto a report to understand exactly what was going wrong in that or at that point in time. I can always look at the kind of impact it would have and what Microsoft did to resolve some of those issues, and if there was any further steps that you need to take to carry out. In this case, you can see as a quick overview, this issue was resolved, and it was a warning event level, so it didn't actually cause any damage. However, it was something to do with Azure Sentinel impacting Australia East and Canada Central. Again, if this was currently or a new event that was happening, or as a planned maintenance or a service issue, it will report that information back onto this area, so you can monitor if there was something to do with any service outage or a service that's down, and how does that impact you in your environment. Now, apart from looking at a service health, let's take a step back out and have a look at some other options. Now, we mentioned we can look at workbooks. Now, if I click on workbooks over here, currently I don't have a workbook that I've created. However, there are quite a few different templates that we can pick this information from and start creating a new workbook to analyze how things would look like. This is typically generating a visual report for me to analyze my information in my environment. Let's try see if we can find one that has some data to look at today. All right, so let's try picking up one of the reports from here. Let's go into the key metrics for my virtual machines. Currently, I only have a few of them running at the moment. So as a quick overview, it shows me multiple virtual machines that I've configured, and it's showing me some details around these virtual machines to see how well they're performing. Now, what I can do is I can explore this data further down. Again, this is, like I said, my CPU usage metric and showing me how they are performing. However, if I wanted to dig deeper into it, it's a nice visual representation of this data. I can click on the key metrics that are used in the backend. Again, if I look down, nice visual representation of the data in different ways to understand currently how my resources are performing. And again, if you want to modify some of this, by all means, you can go into edit and change some of these details to understand if you want to capture certain of the elements. This is a default template that I'm picking up just to kind of explain how a visual reporting can look like in your environment. Let's explore a couple of the tabs and see what data we can find. Now, as part of the regions, this is showing me resources implemented in different regions that I have. And again, I can explore this into more detail if I needed to. Currently, it's showing me resources in UK South and shows me how much data or how many resources currently running in my setup in terms of virtual machines. I have, again, you can see I have some virtual machines utilizing up to 12.9% in Australia and 3% in UK South. And if there were any health issues from these resources, we should be able to find that information in here. And you can see currently there's no issues with the resources that are running. However, some of the other machines that I have, they're unavailable because they're not running at this point in time. Now, this is a very, very quick overview of the workbooks. So if you are looking to create some more visual representing reports, you can by all means create your own workbooks. You don't have to rely on the templates that are there. By all means, play around with some of this to explore some more data into that. Now, for the next part of the session, let's jump into looking at logs. Now, logs are typically capturing data from multiple sources. When you're creating or working with logs, you have to go and start creating a log in your Azure environment. Typically, this is what we refer as a log analytics workspace, a space for where you can store your logs into different tables in your environment. Now, typically when you have data captured within your log environment, you should be able to monitor some of this. If I scroll down further onto my Azure Monitoring blade, I can see in my environment what log analytics workspaces I have currently configured. Now, if I can see for now, it's only showing me one, but let's pick up all my resources to see if I can show other workspaces that I'm working with. Now, let's choose one of my workspaces that I have, and let's go into the logs. Now, this has taken me directly into the log analytics workspace of that particular resource that I have enabled, and showing me a quick overview around what type of data is capturing. Now let's take a step back out of this. Let's keep it in Azure Monitor for now, rather than going directly into that particular logs data, and go back into my logs. And in here, I have some options to run quick queries over here. I can choose some of these queries to run from. However, it needs to make sure that there is related data in the backend for me to run this. Typically, these queries that you run are based in KQL or custom query language. This is where you can design your own queries and go dig deeper into much more depth onto data that you're looking to find out of the logs. Now, as a quick example of this, let's find out what tables I have available at the moment. Let's pin these tables to have a quick look. Let's explore one of the tables, and then we'll stop into this, as knowing KQL is not necessarily part of this course. A quick understanding of this is good enough. Now I'll explore, let's pick up data from one of my resources in here. Now let's check out one of these tables. Let's run this query. Now let's make some space. All I've done is called out a table called device login events. You can see it's picking up information around device login data from here. It's got a lot of different information that's available for me to look at from these logs. Obviously, currently it's limiting my results from up to 1,000 results at the moment. However, if I wanted to dig deeper into this, I can create a better query rather than just calling out the table name and pulling out all the data from it. I can go and define my query further to dig deeper into showing me particular resource type. I can narrow the search based on my requirements and find out more information on what's going on with the resource. Now, this resource shows me that there was a successful logon that happened in this resource. Now, if I might want to create a report to find out how many virtual machines currently have login attempts to them, how many of them were successful, how many of them were unsuccessful, create me a ratio between them. Again, anything that you can come up with, you can create a query for that, and you can run this query using KQL and explore some of that data in here. Now, for this part of the demo, I'll stop here with the logs. This was just to give you a quick overview to understand that these logs are using log analytics workspaces. Typically, you'll have a log analytics workspace available to you where you're feeding some data into this, either coming from devices, coming from different resources, or you're pushing data from other security tools in your environment. And then you can go into this and run queries to dig deeper into finding out specifics that you are looking for in analyzing that data. Now, for the next part of the session, let's have a look at what can we do with all these reports that the Azure Monitor is showing us, all this data that Azure Monitor has for us to explore. Either we're looking at activities that are monitored or captured for us in Azure environment, either picking up the metrics from different resources or going into the logs from multiple sources that I'm feeding into log analytics workspaces, or if it was to do with my service health, some resource that has an outage in the backend. I'm not necessarily going to go into service health every single day to check if there's an outage. Well, maybe that's a good idea to do, but maybe sometimes I'm too busy with work and I'm not necessarily looking for that. It could be nice for me to be made aware if there was a planned maintenance happening by some sort of an alert, some sort of input coming to me to tell me, hey, watch out for something that's going to happen in future, or there's a service that has current outage right now. Now, instead of waiting for me to receive that information, I can start looking at planning that in terms of generating alerts in my environment. Now, for this part of the session, we are going to look at alerts and talk about how we can go into managing alerts or creating different rules on how this Azure Monitor can generate alerts for me. Now, currently you can see I have a couple of alerts that are running or already visible for me to look at. A lot of the time, your critical workload that you have in Azure will generate alerts, backup being one of them. And I can see a couple of alerts raised in my environment from the backups that we were working on. One of them was a partial successful backup for the disaster recovery that we were creating. But let's have a look at what can we do in terms of creating these. For me to manage some of this, there's two parts to this. One, I will go and create an alert. Then the second part would be, as a result of that alert being triggered, do I want a certain action to be taken for that? Now, for that, we'll have to create an action group. So we can predefine groups of different types of actions within them. and then we can assign them to different alerts or rules that we are creating for alerts. So as and when they're triggered, they'll go and simply call out for an action to take or to be triggered out for us. Now let's have a look at all of that in one go. Let's try creating a new alert for us in this environment and see how that goes. Let's start with creating a new alert rule. Now, when you're creating an alert rule, you could define an alert rule's scope to be as wide as your entire subscription. So if you're deciding to say, throughout my subscription, if I have a particular issue, let me know. Or you could be specific. Maybe you want to pick up a critical workload in your environment and suggest if this workload has a particular issue, please raise an alert or take certain actions and also notify me as that is happening. So in this case, let's take a simple example. Let's go into my research group that we were working on. Again, I'll pick up the virtual machine for this particular part of the demo to see, hey, this is my critical workload that I'm working with. This is an app server 3, important server for me to work with. So that's the scope. So I'm narrowing my scope down to a single resource. However, like I said, you can keep your scope broader. You can keep it to an entire subscription. However, your conditions that you create for that will then have to be specific on what type of issues are you looking to capture from within your entire subscription. Now let's move on, have a look at some of these details. Once I've got my scope in place, let's go into conditions. And in the conditions, we can define what could happen to this machine, this virtual machine that we have running, that it should report for. For example, I can pick up from some of these options here, or simply click on see all signals. Then I can get to pick from a lot of different options. Things like you can search from different logs to find out different information that's happening. Maybe computer that's missing an update, let me know about it. Or if I find something like malware detection in that virtual machine, tell me about it. Or I can keep on going down to look at some other options. Let's explore some more details further down. Maybe if it's got a resource health, report that to me. We can pick some metrics saying the CPU consumed credits or network bandwidth. We can pick up quite a few different details from in here. Now let's go and choose one of them. Let's go back up and decide to pick one of these options from here. Let's say if I was to have the stopped Windows services or Windows login failed. So Windows failed login. Maybe that's a good one to pick from. And this is typically going to be a log analytical query that is going to pick up. So it has an example query built in for me. Or we can say shutdown of the virtual machine. Again, we'll pick one for now and let's carry on with that. So I want to know or an alert raised when there's a failed login attempt to this particular virtual machine, and that's the condition that I am configuring at this stage. Now it's showing me the query in KQL or crystal query language, something that we could run in our logs. However, this time I wanted to create an alert for me as and when this happens. Now let's have a quick look. Currently I have some details. So I want it to bring this data back to me with aggregation of every 5 minutes. That's fine. I'll leave some of these details as standard. I won't make changes to them, and I'll look at defining the operator to say, hey, if there was an attempt and there was a failed login attempt, do I want to create a threshold? Let's assume if there were 5 login attempts, not a big issue, or 3 failed login attempts, not a big issue. Sometimes when I'm trying my password out or someone else is logging in, they could have a failed attempt. So if it's like 2 or 3 failed attempts, it's not an issue, it's a regular occurrence for us. However, if this was like 7 or 10 different attempts within a frequency that is below like 5 minutes frequency, then maybe there's something else. Somebody's randomly trying loads of different password attempts to log into this machine. I need to know about it. So you can add a threshold at this point over here. Now it gives you a rough estimation cost of you creating this alert on how much this will cost you to run. For now, we'll leave that alone and move away from here. Let's start creating some of these details so we are happy with the condition that we've got, that we have a virtual machine, and if there was a failed login attempt on this, we want to be made aware of that. Now let's carry on creating this. Oh, apologies, jumped too many menus. Let's go back into the condition and let's tie down some details here, simply because we can't say threshold is 0. So even if it's greater than 0, so even a single attempt for me in this case, I want to know. Well, however, you can come up with a better logical scenario. We can go up to say 2. If there are 2 login attempts in 5 minutes, we're okay. Any more than that, raise an alert for us. Now let's move on to the next tab for us in here. So as an action of when the condition is met for the scope that we've defined, so this virtual machine has a login attempt more than twice in 5 minutes, what should it do? Now this is where we can actually go into typing, plugging in an action group that I might already have in place. Now I have a couple of them already, but maybe it's worthwhile us seeing how to create an action group while we are within defining an alert rule. We could, however, do this in the beforehand and then go and tie this in. It doesn't make a difference depending on what you want to do and how you're comfortable with. Now let's go and create a new action group while we're at it. Now in the action group, some basic details. I'm going to put this into the same resource group that we're working on. Currently, I'll leave the region global and I'll give this action group a name. Let's call this AZ104 Action Group 1. Now the display name, I'll keep the display name same. By all means, if you want to keep a different display name, you can. Now, as part of this action group, it will create a notification for us that we can choose to create this notification in 2 different ways. One, we want to email Azure Resource Manager roles. We have some built-in roles that we spoke about in module 2. So we can have a look at some of those details in here. So we can send a notification to the owner of this resource, to a contributor, to the reader, or monitoring contributor or reader, if these roles are defined within that environment. So we can send a notification to them. However, I could choose not to do that and decide to send an email out to somebody else. So I can choose an email address of my liking by ticking this box. I can choose a message sent out to a phone number by ticking that box and typing the phone number in, and choose a country code that suits me, or depending on where that person is. I can choose a mobile app notification to be added in here, or a voice message sent out to somebody and adding a phone number. Now I have some of these options to configure in here. Just for this part of the demo, I'll leave this menu out and I'll choose, let's assume I will go back into the Azure role, and we decide to send this to the owner of that resource. So whoever created this resource, let's inform them that their resource has an issue right now. And I'll say okay to that. Now let's add a name. Let's say admin error. Cool. Now, apart from defining the notification, we can then take further actions. Now, this is not just it. We're not just stopping at just notifying somebody. We can add other actions to it. Now, in this part of the demo, I'm not looking to create further actions to this. However, there are quite a few different options that we can explore in here. We can create quite a few different automated options in here. Things like automation runbook. We can also add logic apps to create automation or flow of instructions in the backend as automation to it. We can stream this to Event Hub or use Azure Functions to go and create or trigger different actions. We can plug this into a secure webhook or webhook. Or if you are using ITSM systems, for example, like ServiceNow, you can help or connect this into ServiceNow to suggest, hey, if this happened, go and raise a ticket in ServiceNow and report it. Maybe add a different severity level to it or send it to a group of people within that. So again, you have some actions that you can build from here as a result of it. So notification becomes a part of it. However, you are still taking further actions to it. Now, just for this part of the demo, I'll leave some of these out. We won't go into configuring any further actions from here. However, it's good to know that we can create certain actions to this. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do with my action groups. And I'm going to hit create and create and review and create this action group. Now, as this action group is created, it's taking me into looking at the details for the action group. So that's the action group that we just created. It's automatically added that to my alert rule that we were creating, and it's suggesting that if that virtual machine has a failed login attempt, this action group will be triggered as a result of that. Now, as I'm happy with all the settings, I can go into my details, This is where I define some basic details. Typically, in most of the resources that we create in Azure, you'll see the basic tab first. This is one of the times that you see the basic details at the end as part of the details. So this is where we can define subscription, the resource group, and severity level. If this was triggered, is this just informational? Is this warning? Is this an error? So maybe a warning message that we want to refer to this. We can give a name to this alert rule. So let's call this AZ104 alert rule. And again, if you want to provide some description on what this is and why you're creating this alert rule, the need for you to have this, you can add some of those details in here if you wanted to. Cool. I'm hoping it's happy with some of these details. And for now, I'll leave this as default. Now, let's click on this, and it's simply asking me to add tags. We'll leave that out for this part of the session. Let's go and see if it validates all the details and hit create to create this alert rule. It seems like it's got the alert rule successfully created. If I go back into checking my alert rules, again, I can see the one that we just created isn't visible as yet. There we go. So AZ104 alert rule that we just created, which is looking at minimum 2 counts of that failed attempt, login attempt to that machine. Target scope is that machine that we're looking at. And in this case, it will simply send out a level 2 severity warning to the action group that we've tied into this part of the session. Now, just to go back in here, typically when the alerts are triggered, you'll see all the alerts visible on your alerts tabs over here, so you can go back and understand what they are. However, in this case, our action group also notifies our owner on that group to understand what's going on in that environment. This brings us to the end of this module. Let's recap the key points we've covered. We've explored the essential of Azure Monitor, learned how to improve incident response with alerting, and delved into analyzing your infrastructure using Azure Monitor logs. Remember, mastering these skills will empower you to effectively monitor and maintain Azure resources, ensuring optimal performance and swift incident resolution. Keep practicing and applying what you've learned to become proficient in Azure Monitor. We encourage you to continue learning and search out a new topic on Microsoft Learn using aka.ms/learn. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you found this course informative and engaging. I look forward to seeing you excel in your Azure journey.